property protection is also being put into question. And then the environmental preservation is also becoming an issue because of these increase in frequencies when it comes to disasters. So how do drones fit into the bigger picture? Because we know that we already have a traditional way, a traditional method in responding to disasters. But we know that with new emerging technology, when they're appropriately integrated into the system, we can fully take advantage of them and make good use and maybe hopefully also reduce the impact that these disasters have. Okay, so the roles of drones in risk and disaster management is that they're able to give us a rapid assessment and are able to provide us with mapping capabilities. So when a disaster occurs, we know that there's some damage, but how much of the damage is there? So drones are able to give you that rapid assessment where drone pilots can go out, collect imagery, and they're able to give an approximate amount of the damage that the communities have faced. And in addition to that, since you now have data rolling in and being given to the relevant stakeholders, there's a lot of situational awareness there. So if there's a bridge that's broken in one community, or maybe there are a couple of buildings that have been damaged in another community, with the data that drones are able to provide, you then have an increased situational awareness, which will enable you to make informed decisions when it comes to the logistical aspects. Drones are also able to provide search and rescue. So these drones should have thermal capabilities for them to be able to aid in search and rescue, because our bodies are able to give out heat signatures, and if your drone has thermal capabilities, it's able to pick up the signatures that our bodies give out. So if somebody's maybe buried somewhere, not too deep, of course, because the camera can only go so far in terms of depth. But if maybe you've been buried by rubble from your building coming down, then the drones that have these thermal cameras are able to pick those heat signatures up. Or maybe you don't have thermal cameras, but sometimes we have situations where people are maybe stuck on a tree when there are floods. Sometimes the drones are able to pick up those images and we can send out information in terms of location, and the rescue teams can then go out to pick the victims up. And then drones can also come in when it comes to logistical support and post-disaster recovery planning. So the logistical support comes in when we're looking at drones that are able to deliver essentials. So we have several drone companies that are doing health deliveries, and they usually have payload capacities that enable them to carry maybe 3 kg essential. 3 kg might seem now, but during an emergency situation, anything that you're able to get victims does become very crucial. So when it comes to logistical support to areas that maybe have been cut off due to bridges breaking, due to roads breaking, you can easily send out drones. So you have rapid assessment, situational awareness, search and rescue, logistical support, and also post-disaster recovery planning. And this increases the efficiency in which we're responding to the disasters themselves. So the drone deployment that took place in March with Cyclone Freddy made its landfall. The first thing that took place was drone unit engagement. So there are various stakeholders here in Malawi that are interested in drones, that are interested in the use of drones and their applicabilities. So we had organizations such as UNICEF, WFP, Red Cross come together and sort of map out a way in which drones are going to be integrated into the response system. And they reached out to the African Drone and Data Academy, which is an institution that's there training individuals in the use of drones, piloting drones, how to analyze the data that you collect from drones. So we were engaged through these organizations to send out drone pilots that are capable of doing so, to collect imagery in areas that so that was a process that took about 2 weeks. So for the 14th March to 15th of March, we're basically mapping out Sorry about that. I had a network issue. Apologies. Okay. So ideally, on the 15th of March is when we had our resource mobilization, just mapping out what we have in terms of equipment. And then from the 16th to the 22nd of March, we had our drone deployment. So we had personnel from the African Drone and Data Academy, personnel from Red Cross, Globi, WFP, and the Department of Disaster Management Affairs come together and deploy the pilots, collect the data. And we also had GIS experts that came in to now make sense of the data that was being collected. And after this activity, we then had a post-cyclone activity. So after action review, where we were sort of reviewing the processes that were there and how we can go ahead and improve on them during the next session of deployment. So what would you need? So the first step would be to collect the aerial imagery, and what equipment would you need for that is drones that are able to capture images, high resolution. And also it's very important to make sure that the images that you're capturing are of high resolution, because a lot of analysis is conducted on the images. So the amount of buildings, how much destruction, we have different organizations coming in to make use of the data that you collected to deduce or to make sense of the data that you collected on their own. And it's also very important to have radio so that you can be able to communicate when it comes to like different teams, because you're not all going to one place. So it's very important to keep that line of communication open. And the type of human and technical resources that you need is certified drone pilots that are able to always have safety first, because again, you don't want to cause more distraction in an already vulnerable situation. And secondly, you need to be able to have the capability to process the data that you're collecting. So for you to be able to process the data that you're collecting, you need a high processing machine power, because at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to just collect the data and not be able to process it and perform some analysis and make informed decisions from it. So it's very important to have this infrastructure up and running. And in terms of personnel, GIS analysts that have skills in photogrammetry and remote sensing are also very vital. And after the processing, you then move on to the data analysis and information extraction process, where the equipment that you need here is just GIS software, is anything that's able to do any data analytics really. And the human and technical resource that you need is access again to the GIS softwares and people that have experience in using artificial intelligence, because again, you want to do things quick. So being able to automatically detect which buildings are damaged is very important when it comes to using drones and data in emergency response. So just to build on the rapid situation awareness, we have an illustration here. The image on your right is just a drone image that was collected during Cyclone Freddy, showing that there was a road over here, but due to the flooding and the intensity of the water that was coming, the road was washed away. So with this information, we were able to know that there's been disruption in terms of like transportation. So whoever is on this side would not be able to go to the other. So drones have the ability to swiftly perform a comprehensive assessment in disaster-stricken areas. So again, just making sure that the images that you're collecting are of high resolution, because you're able to extract critical information based on just the images themselves. So in addition to collecting the images, we're also able to generate maps. So ideally, once we collect the images, we process them and then we stitch them together to produce an orthomosaic. An orthomosaic is just it's like a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces of the puzzle are images, and once you've collected the images and you put them together, you're now able to have an image of a larger area. So this was just an area that was also collected during the Cyclone Freddy. We did run an algorithm to detect which buildings were damaged. So I'm not sure if you're able to see, but the dots that are red are those that were damaged, and those that were yellow were not entirely damaged. But then again, this is just an initial assessment, right? Sometimes you get a misclassification where a building is not going to be labeled as damaged because it's just fallen on itself. And because it's fallen on itself, the roof is still on top, the roof is still intact and on top. So the algorithm does not classify that as a damaged building. So it's very important to also ground truth. But because this is just a preliminary assessment, I think it does a pretty good job. And then this is just also another map that was showing which areas are accessible and which ones are not, based on the information that our deployed drone pilots were able to provide. In terms of search and rescue capabilities, I already did talk about this earlier, where if you want to do thermal, you need a drone that has a thermal camera for you to be able to pick up the heat signatures that our bodies are able to give out. So there was an interesting situation where one particular village in Chirazulu, which is the southern part of Malawi, was washed out. So a village in Chirazulu was washed out around 5 a.m. So we know that at this point, people are still sleeping, right? So because of the heavy rainfalls and the consistency of the rainfall, we did get a lot of landslides. So during 5 a.m. In this particular village, we had a landslide, and a lot of buildings were washed off with people. So people were buried along with the houses. I have a video over here. I just hope it's able to play, which is just showing an overview of the area itself. Okay. So bear with me. Okay, that's unfortunate. But ideally, the image that we're looking at here, this is just part of the landslide after it dried out. So there were buildings in this location, but they were washed off due to the landslide that happened. The next slide is also just an illustration showing the before and after. So we use satellite imagery and drone images to sort of see which buildings were destroyed and which ones weren't, of the same location that the previous video was from. So what we're currently seeing is the satellite imagery, and what's underneath it is the drone imagery. So you notice that the buildings here will eventually disappear because of the landslide that was coming down. Seems like the internet is on my side. But you notice that these buildings will no longer be standing. So the comparison is between the drone imagery and the satellite imagery. So if you do take this to the stakeholders, they're able to know that, okay, in Tautila village, we had a couple of buildings that were damaged due to the landslide that happened. And we know that based on the census activities that we have, we know that in each household, we have several number of people, and you can then proceed to do that analysis to sort of approximate how many people were affected by the landslide before you do any sort of ground truthing. Okay. So it's seems all rosy, but there are challenges that comes with drone deployment. So one of the challenges that we face during the drone deployment is data security and infrastructure. So those large amounts of data that was being collected, but we didn't necessarily have a central repository for depositing this data. So sometimes there'll be a delay between collecting the data and then the people that are supposed to make informed decisions receiving the data. So that delay can again reduce the efficiency that we're trying to improve. So it's very important that you have a central repository and a data infrastructure that's already put in place so that the sharing of information can be seamless. And also privacy is very important. People are already in a vulnerable situation, so you need to make sure that you're upholding any ethical issues and you're making sure that you're keeping the data that you're collecting private and it doesn't eventually get in the wrong hands. So data sharing between field members and analysts should be more streamlined when it comes to deploying drones into the field when you're responding to emergency situations. Another thing is interference and regulations. So we know that most of the areas that were affected are areas that are either remote and the network is not as great. So it's very important that you also have like some backup or at least you have some strong connectivity so that you're able to communicate with the rest of the team. So that's also very paramount when it comes to deploying drones. Also, making sure that there's communication between the airspace users. So you have helicopters during emergencies that are either trying to get aid to other locations. So we're all using the same airspace. It's very important to make sure that we're still trying to be safe. So there's supposed to be appropriate decongestion because our drones fly up to 120 meters or 400 feet, right? And imagine if we're flying and then a helicopter is also flying at a low level. Obviously, anything can happen at that point if you don't have any decongestion and if there's no communication between manned aircrafts and unmanned aircraft. So that's also very important when it comes to deploying drones. So involving air traffic controllers during this process is very important to make sure that everybody is safe. The weather can also be a limitation because drones are susceptible to adverse weather. So if it's raining, we can't go out. And during the cyclone, obviously, we're not going to get favorable weather, so that can be a limitation. It's also important that the stakeholders that you're providing the data to know the capabilities of the drone, the limitations of the drone, because sometimes you're asked to map out an entire district, whereas that's not possible. So if people are aware of the capabilities of drones, they can then go ahead and give you realistic demands, right? So maybe you could use satellite data at first and see which areas are more problematic and then send out the drones to those areas instead of suggesting to map out a larger area. So it's very important that there's some awareness on what drones can actually do. And finally, the last limitation is flight time. So we know that, again, drones are an emerging technology. And when it comes to like flight time and battery life, that's still being worked on. So the limitation is there, meaning that you're not going to work as fast because an average drone will get you 25 minutes flight time and you need to be in the air more than that. So sometimes your charging battery is not doing anything. So that could be a limitation in its own right. So what do we hope for in the future? So currently here in Malawi, we're developing a standard operations procedure where we're streamlining drone usage in the emergency response system. So it's important because sometimes different clusters in the emergency response do not know that drones are there. So having the standard operations procedure, make them aware, and also we will have a standardized way of doing things. And then I think the is working on an algorithm that is able to
We've lost you. Hello, Ndapile. Would it be possible to turn off your camera and finish without it? Maybe that will work.
Apologies again for the network. Um, just share my screen one more time. All right. Yeah, so we're in the process of creating baseline geospatial data so that we fill in any gaps that were identified. And one of the processes is actually using OpenStreetMap, digitizing buildings, digitizing roads. And hopefully we're hoping that stakeholders buy into using drones in the emergency response because it does increase the efficiency and you're able to get high resolution data really quickly, which is very important because time is an important factor when it comes to response. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for the presentation. That was a good presentation. And again, we compliment the good work you're doing from the ground. We really appreciate your efforts in disaster response. Malawi has been hit hard, I think, in the previous seasons with the cyclones, and we really appreciate the efforts you're doing. So if we have anyone on the call with a question or concern, you have 2 minutes or to raise your question and get it responded to before we end the session.
Hi, I'm from MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, and after Cyclone Freddy, we were mapping in Palombe area with Map Malawi. So I'm curious if you cooperated with Map Malawi, and secondly, if you're going to share these SOPs afterwards in a way that my colleagues will notice, because our GIS officer, who was then in Malawi, was actually just doing a similar project, mapping refugee camps with drones, and I had a presentation about it like two days ago. So I think there is a potential should next season something similar happen for cooperation.
Dapil, are you speaking? We cannot hear you, please. You can switch off your camera and Apile so that you don't have to struggle with your bandwidth.
I apologize. My network's not working with me, but I think I did hear a part of the first question. So I guess now would be a good time to say, but I did co-found Map Malawi with Zola. So I had Zola focus on the remote mapping, whereas I was focusing mainly on the drone mapping itself. So she was leading on that end whilst I was on this one. And in terms of sharing the SOP, we'll definitely do that. We do have stakeholder engagement before we actually release it so that we can get feedback from everybody else that's relevant to the emergency response, and we'll definitely make sure that MSF is part of the organizations that are part of the review process.
Thank you. Jana, you have any other question? Okay. If we don't have any. Okay, please go ahead. Diana, can you please unmute and just
I
speak?
think it's she typed in the chat, so
Oh, good. Yeah, you managed to answer the question, Dapile, and thank you for your
All right.
presentation.
Oh,
Thank you.
do we have any other person with a question or concern? Okay, if there is none, so I want to congratulate you, Dabile, for the awesome presentation, and yeah, that was a good one. So I think people are breaking up for lunch over here in from wherever we are. So
Okay.
for those going for their lunch, please have a wonderful meals, and see you in the next sessions if you'll manage to join them. Yeah, so
Okay.
thank you very much. Dabile, you could please make me a host so that I can
All right.
end the streaming. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
I think
you.
you're already host.